My name is Olga Petelczyk. I'm internal auditor. I'm certified auditor. I run the project Audit, but also I'm the chairwoman of non-financial reporting group. I'm also the member of the group created by Ministry of Finance devoted to non-financial reporting. Oh, hello from Oman. I have also a great pleasure to be an expert in a climate leadership program and also an ambassador of 30% Club Poland. And today we celebrate the first anniversary of 30% Club in Poland. I don't know if Milena today is with us. But in the evening we will have a nice meeting to celebrate this event. So why Audit Talks over coffee and what are we doing here? So maybe a few words. I ran this, during the COVID time, I decided to do something to be more in contact with people. And I started to think that it would be nice to match the knowledge about non-financial reporting, SSG and audit, because it's, in my opinion, it's really important match, but not so obvious for some people. So in 2020, I start from my first webinar only we can say, but in that moment, that was a lot for me. 60 people joined me, but after I asked you if I can do something better, so you told me as a participant, so Olga, maybe you can invite some guests. So I start to invite some guests. At the end of 2021, I asked, okay, maybe we can do something more. So you say, Olga, so maybe you will invite the guests from abroad. So thanks to this, today we are here on first English-speaking run webinar. So I'm really happy. I'm really excited about this, and I must tell you that I'm really stressed also because yesterday I count and you participants registered for this webinar from 29 countries, and it's almost 400 people that signed in for this webinar. So it's a great success, and you made a really great job. But I also believe that it's thanks to great guest speaker that I invite for this webinar, and they agree to share their knowledge with you. And I will start to introduce them, and I will start from Professor Bolesław Rok. Really important person for me, a great expert about sustainable development, non-financial reporting. We can say that the father of sustainable development, business ethics in Poland. Professor is a professor of sustainability management at Koźmiński University, but also is a guest professor in some other universities abroad, is one of the leader of climate leadership program in Poland, and support a lot of initiatives, organization, big and small companies, NGOs in their way of to be more responsible and more sustainable. So welcome, Professor Rok, today. Thank you that you are with us. And Professor will be speaking as a first guest. The second guest, Robert Adamczyk. Robert is also Polish, but as I know, does not live in Poland, and work for European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. Is SSG advisor, so maybe in this. So some of your countries, Robert, already visit you and help you to develop. But what is also really important, Robert is a member of EFRAG expert group, and he's one of creators, we can say, a new regulation about sustainable reporting. And also is a member of EU platform of sustainable finance. So today, Robert will share with us knowledge about what's new in the EU regulation and how we would like to motivate, we can say, companies to be more responsible. how we would like to motivate investors to be more responsible. Welcome, Robert, on our meeting today. And my third guest, with whom I will have a pleasure to make an interview in the next part of our meeting today, is Muner Al-Muharai. I hope that I pronounce well your surname. Muner is a great person, great professional auditor. He's a chairman of the board of IA Oman and group chief audit officer. But I had the pleasure to meet Muner in Japan, in Tokyo, on IA Global Conference, and we had the pleasure also to work together on updating the third line model. Now this is the third line IA model. Before it was third line model of defense. So probably every one of you know this model. And I decided to invite Muner today to share with you the knowledge about our rule, the rule of internal audit in this new world, we can say, in front of this all challenges connected with climate change and ESG. But for sure, and I see now we have 250 people participate, for sure you will not join us today if you have not knowledge about this webinar. So I would like to thank you a lot to great partners of this webinar, and this is IA Poland. Thank you very much. IA Oman, thank you. ACCA Poland, Polska Izba Biegłych Rewidentów, so in English is a Polish Chamber of Statutory Auditors, also really important organization, and Climate Leadership Program powered by United Nations, and great work for also the partner of today's meeting. So thanks to them, probably some of you know about this webinar, but also I would like to say thank you every single person who give a like, who share the information, to every National Institute of Internal Audit that share this knowledge with the members, because I know that, I don't know, Litva, Kazakhstan, Hungary, and for sure Bosnia and Herzegovina, Cyprus. I know that at least in this country, but probably in many others, also the National Institute share the knowledge. ECIIA also share the knowledge of the LinkedIn. So every of you is, we can say, part of this success, and I would like to thank you to every single person. Thanks to we are here together. So okay, so this is from me. So we can start. The next part of our meeting today. So Professor Rock, I would like to grateful for your presentation. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. It's here. I hope you can see it. And it's so I have to say I'm not an auditor, not an internal auditor. I'm just dealing with sustainable management. But I think that it is really introduction to this today talk, and I hope to keep it rather short. So I've just seen yesterday. Yes, I think yesterday it was a video from Davos with an emotional speech of Al Gore on who care, and it was really, highly emotional and so realistic that we are just facing the catastrophe and we are not doing enough. And I think that what is necessary, it's not just a wake-up call, it's much more. We have to change almost everything. And it's, of course, now we are saying that we have a new type of leadership, That's corporate climate leadership. So I will say a few words about that, starting from this. All of you heard about all those IPCC reports, and especially in the last one, or the last part of the last one, there was a clear message. And just to quote a headline from The Guardian, scientists have just told us how to solve the climate crisis. Will the world listen? And I think it's the main problem, that nobody wants to listen, in fact. In this report, it's mostly a call to action. It's a manifesto for ending the fossil fuel age based on science, evidence, and so on. But it's also, I think, one of the most important theses there is that the climate crisis is driven by how the world's wealthy currently live, consume, and invest. So it's us, it's OECD countries, it's population in which we have to change. We have to change our daily behavior, and especially companies. And it's so I will try to look at some motivation and drivers for this kind of change, radical change, disruptive change on different levels among the different companies. And also, I think what is important, that adaptation and mitigation to climate change or climate crisis or climate catastrophe must go hand in hand. So from one side, we have to think about how to adapt to the environment in which we are going to live. And at the same time, we have to mitigate, at least, to make it a little bit better, because we can't avoid climate catastrophe. It's here already. It's a way, what are we going to do? But it's also what is important outcome from this report, that we have a significant increase in climate crisis awareness. It means that it's just a hot topic. It's not only that that people are talking about that, but also we have a lot of regulation, we have a lot of commitment changes already in different in different companies, the big brands, and so on. And we have, of course, still conferences. There is just an ongoing conference today in Stockholm, which is a 50 years plus. From creation of United Nations Environment, and from this first conference or summit on climate. And I think that it's important to understand what we achieved already after 50 years, but also what is the future. What are we going to do? And especially, of course, education on different levels. What I'm dealing with is rather, with managerial education, with executive education. So I'm trying to work with managers in different companies, from different companies, sustainability managers, but not only, just board members. And I think that this climate crisis awareness is really on a high level now, and it is important. If we look at the drivers for this change in business, which is going on, and we can see it everywhere, especially I'm talking about the biggest companies, here in Poland, in Europe, but just globally, I think that the first motivation is access to finance. The financial system has a key role to play in the development on climate innovation and economic transformation. And in fact, looking at changes what financial institutions are now implementing, it will be just, a question of survival for a lot of companies if they will not adjust to all requirements which financial sector will put ahead of them. So it's the main motivation for companies. We are just, last 2 days we were talking in Warsaw on the Sustainable Economy Summit in Warsaw with different participants, CEOs from biggest companies. And I think it's the main motivation for them. And of course, the second, which is in fact parallel to this, is new regulation. I think that, of course, Robert will say much more about that because regulations are coming or they are already here. And I think that it is important not to think of them, oh, maybe we will deal with that, later. No, I think that there is a growing awareness that adapting to those regulations is a necessity. And it is an awareness among CEOs from different companies, not only the biggest companies. And I think it's for the first time, probably, that business leaders can understand that regulations are necessary. Because normally, we always, had this same kind of narrative that, don't interrupt with business, and it was a call to politicians and public administration. But I think that the third driver is market pressure. Large brands encourage, or let's say, simply force their business partners to change, adapt to climate policies, manage sustainably, and it's visible on the market. That in the procurement policy, we can see everywhere a lot of requirements concerning, your carbon footprint measurement and management, your on all those sustainability indicators. Big brands are expecting from their partners in the supply network, which is really upstream and downstream. And it's really a biggest, I think, pressure for millions of companies around the world. It's a pressure coming from big brands in the supply chain. And then it is a corporate pressure. Corporate pressure, I understand that is a pressure coming from shareholders, from board of directors, owners, corporate headquarters, and it's visible, in countries like Poland, where we have a lot of multinationals operating from different countries, but also with the affiliated here in Poland on a local market. And then, they are doing just what headquarter is required from them. And it's so it is really, for a lot of managers, it's a really important driver, to have these requirements from their headquarter. And then social pressure, of course, which is, we can see that consumers, customers, citizens in the global market are increasingly beginning to expect the right attitude from business. And it's not only concerning sustainability, it's always a problem with, being part of the Russian market, for example, for a lot of companies, the strong expectation from consumers, from citizens, is that you have to withdraw from the Russian market. So it's for the first time, I think, that this social pressure in such a high level, and it's such a common issue. Is that enough from the climate catastrophe perspective? We see that the state of our ecosystems, including the extent, the effects of climate change already occurring. We can see, 50 plus Celsius temperature in Pakistan just in last few weeks. We can see all those changes which are going on. And then we have to think that what we really need, let's say the sixth factor, which is corporate leadership. Is it a missing ingredient or main driver? I don't know. But just to quote one of the business person which is well known in Poland, Artur Nowak-Gocławski. He's also, a graduate from my executive studies, but he started a big A&G group. It's not ING, it's ANG, but it's also in the financial sector. And just to quote him, the future of the world depends on entrepreneurs taking total responsibility. And I think that it's really that we entrepreneurs can decide about the future of the world because we have the talents, experience, and sometimes wisdom needed for this. And we have resources to put our ideas into practice. So I'd like to say a few words about this corporate leadership in terms of climate issues, what we can expect. Just to look at the recently published book, which is the New Corporate Climate Leadership, and we can read there, from Edward Cameron, which is co-author of this book, that in almost 25 years working on climate change, I can honestly say that the emergence of corporate climate leadership is one of the more optimistic trends I have encountered. 10 years ago, most companies were either hostile to or agnostic about emissions reductions. Even 5 years ago, I can say. Today, more than 6,000 companies, and it's growing pretty fast, from over 120 countries, representing $36 trillion, or half of the global economy, have made one or more climate commitments. And of course, it's maybe we can say it's only commitments, but it's a huge drive. It's really, it's exactly what we can see, a kind of explosion of corporate climate leadership. And it's also because I'm also on this market for some 25 years dealing with those issues. It's for me, it's also a big change for all those recent years, and especially in Poland, but also in other, at least European countries. I think it's a huge change which we can see now, this explosion of corporate climate leadership. So it's really an important part of SEM. And we can compare, different motivations. From one side, we have also well-known, let's say, climate influencer or business influencer, Paul Polman, which is saying in his book, Net Positive Company, a tremendous shift is taking place across business as climate moves from a peripheral issue to mainstream concern in boardrooms around the world. This presents immense opportunity to use industry as an engine for accelerated action. Many business leaders recognize the need to do more. We need them actively leading from the front. And I think that this statement that we can find a lot of business leaders which would like to do more, even ahead of regulation, even ahead of this pressure. It's really significant that we have, climate corporate leadership already. It's kind of at least from the Paul Polman perspective, it's rather a kind of a moral duty. It's also a kind of a, new ethical leadership or something like that. And from the other side, we can hear, Larry Fink from BlackRock, which is, and he's saying, we follow in his letter to stakeholders recent, we focus on sustainability not because we are environmentalists, but because we are capitalists and fiduciaries to our clients. We know that climate risk is an investment risk. And it's exactly so, two different motivations, but the same outcome. It means that it's also from the financial investment community and from the business leaders or former CEO, it's also the same attitude. We have big trends in the economy, and just to say about two of them, the first is concerning regeneration, and the regenerative economy is really coming to be, becoming a hot topic in different business schools, but also in business, mostly in US, but also it's coming to Europe. It's based on a very good book from Paul Hawken, regeneration, ending the climate crisis in one generation. I strongly recommend. There is a web page, with a lot of information about this trend, but also a lot of big companies are going to change into this direction. Just a quote from Walmart, US retail company. The commitments we are making today, not only to aim to decarbonize Walmart's global operation, they also put us on the path to becoming a regenerative company, one that works to restore, renew, and replenish in addition to preserving our planet, and encourages others to do the same. So it's something that it's not enough just to stop, making harm for the environment. We have to use our business power to recreate ecosystems. And I think that it's a really important, especially if we see that it is economic opportunities also. And we can see all this market with compensation, with carbon credits, and so on. We need standards. I know that the European Commission already started to work on some standards for carbon credit market, offsetting and so on. But compensation will be also additional to reduction, will be one of the most important parts. In Europe, the most popular trend is this net positive economy. It's also from this book by Paul Polman and Andrew Winston. And it's also a lot of companies are saying that we interface. American company began its journey to develop carbon negative products following the adoption of Climate Take Back, which aims to reverse global warming. So it's about giving more to the world than they take. I'm using the term, positive impact. The companies with positive impact, and it's net positive. It's like we can think about our behavior, that we have different ups and downs in our life, but just we can see about. What about net? Are we net positive as a human beings in our activities, or rather net negative? And of course, all of us would like to be net positive. And it's, I think that we can apply this to management and to a lot of companies which are doing it. So we can say that the ecosystem of change is ready already. We have, all these discussions about new trends, a kind of a new social contract with, diversity, corporate social activism, climate justice, climate ethics, ecological ceiling in donut economics. All those, narratives are here. We have investment sector which is ready. With all regulation and all this internal change which we can see. Then we had a lot of innovation for the climate. We can see, this innovation for positive impacts and on different levels. We can see on, alternatives to packaging, plastic packaging, or alternatives to meat, or there are a lot of possibilities now. So innovation for climate neutrality is already here. So we have to use it better. Then we have all this, let's say, resources, raw materials, energy system, carbon footprint measurement and management, renewable energy system, closing the loops, and so on. And then we have artificial intelligence, robotics, technology, and we can hear that sustainability is the new digital. So we can say that everything is prepared, in fact. Is it really? Just one graph from the investment perspective about market reality. On the left side, we have potential contribution to net emission reduction according to IPCC reports. On the right side, we have venture capital funding over past trading 24 months up to April 2020, and we can see that majority of investments are going into electric lights and heavy vehicles, all these electric cars, which are pretty much popular. And we have, and in fact, they have a rather low effect on CO2 reduction, or even, shift to bikes and e-bikes, which is also the second biggest investment concerning assets under management. And then it had just limited contribution. In fact, the biggest contribution could have ecosystem restoration. It's exactly what I said about regenerative economy. And in fact, it's the lowest level of investment already. So from one side, we can see that, we have everything is ready, but market reality, it's still in the old traditional way that we are not doing what should be done from the investment perspective. And to finish, it is last slide. I've just read. It was, I think, in the beginning of February, there were discussions about the possibility of having gas in taxonomy. Of course, now we have different situation after Russian invasion, but it's still, I can hear people saying that EU taxonomy becomes the new standard for greenwashing. And of course, we know that ESG has become a widely used term and trend, especially among investors. Everyone is using ESG. Is just, like we were using, CSR, then sustainability, shared value by Michael Porter. Now we are using ESG. So instead of companies maximizing profit, we have purpose-oriented companies, climate-resilient businesses. We are very good in all those, in new words. And in fact, we have a big bank of companies' declarations, commitments on climate neutrality, reduction, carbon footprint, compensation, zero waste, zero carbon. Do we have also zero trust? I think it's really a huge role for auditors, because a lot of companies, they have net zero pledges. What does it mean in practice? We have a lot of standards, regulations, but the market practice, it's not ready. Are we going to change it through regulation, or are we going to change it through, pressure from headquarters or from the financial sector? And I can finish by saying that it's not enough to measure ESG indicators to make significant changes. The measurement often leads to a dead end. So comfortable doesn't show the impact. And what society really needs is not just better reporting, but better companies that are built to be resilient in the 21st century. Companies need to get out ahead of their customers' changing habits and ahead of regulation. That's the reason that I'm rather on the side of Paul Polman, saying that, yes, it's a great opportunity, but we have to look also at the reality and how to confront our commitments with market reality and with the real changes we can implement. And of course, I can see here a huge role for auditors. I hope that the whole group of auditors will change the market, and it will be the main additional, let's say, the seventh driver for change. I was talking about 6 drivers, and now we have the 7th driver, which is the most important. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you a lot for your presentation. I enjoy a lot. I think that everyone makes a note, at least I hope, because I make a lot, even if I have this presentation already. But what for me it's important, what you said at the end, that we can make a company better And we work like internal auditor from inside. So maybe people from outside don't see our work, but we are the one that can help company build the trust. So it's really nice. So if some companies have internal auditors, but say something more that, as you mentioned, that we are already ready and we need more motivation or maybe more pressure to make business in better or in different way. So Robert, tell a bit about this motivation or maybe pressure, which are the EU regulation, because it's a huge package of new requirements.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Always a hard act to follow from Professor Rock. But maybe just in the introduction, was yesterday in Warsaw. I've just come back to London. There's a public holiday here because of the Queen's Jubilee. But it is, so I'm Polish and based partially in Poland, partially in internationally or London. But I started due diligence, and so I'm not a financial auditor, but as an environmental auditor. From 93, I think my first audits in Eastern Europe during the privatizations in Poland. So I have worked on due diligence assessment and the environmental audits for a long time and looking how it has evolved. And I think what is happening right now and what I will present is the fastest change in environmental or sustainability regulations that I've seen since I started in the early 90s. So I think that's an important area to see. It's a huge change, and it's a global change, which I will discuss. So I put my slides slightly in terms of maybe say a bit about EBRD, because I think it's always useful to say where we come from and therefore our angle, a bit on the EU, focus on the Sustainable Action Plan and the Taxonomy, SFDR and CSRD is the legislation which the professor mentioned. I'll try to maybe put a bit more light on that, what it means, what are the future trends, particularly in terms of some international areas, and maybe finish off on what is the role of the auditor and which way we go and what it is. I think it is going to be essential that auditors, both internal and the verifiers external, are able to assess the data, assess the information, to stop that greenwashing. And what I think the professor alluded, is it going to be greenwashing the taxonomy? I don't think so. But without the audits, without verification, without clear systems, the reporting will, of course, become not as good or useful as it should. So in terms of ESG, because these slides will be shared, I leave the definitions. The PRI, UN PRI ones are probably the best used, but we can move on from that. And the ESG, of course, is to start to identify relevant ESG risk, support ESG performance through management systems, and facilitate financing through consistent, reliable ESG reporting. And in order to have that information, to identify the risks, to manage the risks, setting matrices and targets, it's essential to have an internal audit system, an internal management system to verify, to assess before it actually is reported. Particularly the bigger the company is, the bigger operations, be it international or local, and many companies have many subsidiaries. Consistency of reporting is, I think, essential and a big role for the auditors. So why EBRD? Who we are actually EBRD, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. We were set up to help in the transition in Eastern Europe from, you could say, from the centrally planned economies to market-driven economies. I think we've succeeded in Poland doing a lot of work. At one stage, we were one of the largest investors. We're still a very substantial investor in Poland. Ukraine, well, probably will be rebuilding. Maybe Russia failed on that side. But it was established to help Eastern Europe, and I think that transition from communist system to market-driven has been overall success. It's still an ongoing process, and now we're changed more into being the green, to support the green investments to become on the green side, as I'll mention. Now, in terms of lenders, international financing, you have multilateral development banks. So most companies will require some international investment. And they will have the project finance, the acquisition finance, corporate loans, and I'll speak about maybe some of the different mechanisms. And there are different sources you can get money. Multilateral development banks are one of those, and that includes the EBRD, IFC, which is part of the World Bank, European Investment Bank, which is probably the largest international investment fund or investor or financing agency in the world, with based in Europe, and of course newly formed but quite a relevant Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. But there are others. There's the New Development Bank. There's others that are going through. You have the national development agencies or state development banks that work on the various supporting investment and sustainable development. But of course, private sector banks have all signed up to, well, most of them, to Equator Principle banks, principles which follows IFC requirements. And the difference between IFC and ourselves is that we have exactly more or less the same, apart from we add the European Union requirements to that. The IFC a bit more global. But there's on some of the social issues, labor issues, we're probably the same. And many commercial banks will implement that. But many investors, as a professor said, will ask this question. It is on the agenda. Look, what is your environmental approach? What is your social approach? What's your governance? And these ESG factors have always been there, but they're now explicitly more asked and assessed. So just go to the next slide. So in terms of the EBRD, I'm not going to dwell too much on that. We were established with sustainability now a role. We now finance projects which have to be Paris aligned. We finance projects that we're looking at the GET, which is environmental positive aspects to them. And we ensure that they're compliant. So this do no significant harm is a key area of our investment. We have, of course, due diligence before we provide loans, debt or equity, working in the regions where we work and assessing that companies have the right systems. So that was a bit of background, what we do and why it's relevant. But it's important to understand that both commercial and development institutions will look at the environmental or ESG issues more and more closely. They always looked at it. They always had the standards. These standards I see now are being developed faster by the private sector than some of the international agencies even. So that is a big change, is that the private sector, as the Professor Rox mentioned, BlackRock, one of the biggest investors, they have taken that as part of their mantra, part of their in-house approach. And I think some of this issues of how legislation is changing, we have to just think about how the sustainability is going to go, how it has been comparable with smoking in restaurants or using a helmet when you go on cycling or skiing. 10, 20 years ago, it was unthinkable that somebody will forbid people or people would not go into a restaurant or a cafeteria and smoke, or that you would use a helmet when you go skiing. I mean, it was the minority. Now, if you see someone smoking somewhere in a restaurant, you'd sort of say, wow, what's happening? And probably ask them to leave. Or if you haven't got a helmet on the ski slope, you'd think, well, they're a bit silly. So this change of internal approach takes time, but it happens. And I think this is where sustainability is. The health and safety is a good example of how it was sort of marginalized. It was something that was there, but now everybody has the responsibility of health and safety. The same will be with sustainability, with climate change and some of the issues we're discussing. So now, the European Union has approached the EU Sustainable Finance Strategy. They developed a strategy in 2018. This was updated in 2021. And the aim is to direct investment into green investments in line with the Green Deal, but also to ensure that we have net carbon approach. So the focus has always been on carbon, on the climate side, but as part of the climate, we have a holistic approach of ensuring we look at the entire issues of ESG. Because if you just look at climate and you don't take into account the social or the biodiversity issues, you might actually do more damage than good, or not get the political or the people support. And without having, of course, support of the people, politicians will fail or companies will fail. So you need to make sure that these issues are integrated. And in this process, the EU has approached that we'll have a taxonomy. And taxonomy comes from you could say, the side of animal kingdom of the classifying depending on the species. We want to classify investments, whether they're green or not, to have a common benchmark, to ensure that when people are saying that something is green, there's an understanding of what that green is. The disclosures are important, but they're not, of course, don't resolve everything. But ensuring that information is provided in a consistent manner allows both investors, the public, stakeholders to make judgments to approach that, and of course the tools that are needed. So in terms of the new action plan, there's 10 points. The aim is to reorientate capital flows towards sustainable investments to achieve these growths. And I'll just say some of these, but I'll focus on the ones I've highlighted and red. It's again, we could have, I think, a conference of 2 days just to, and probably would only touch the tip of the iceberg, and there's still all the stuff below it. But just to give you the approach, copied some issues from the Commission. This is a very fast-moving timeline. By 24, 25, everything is going to be in place, reporting, and we're already 2022. So really 2 years, year and a half to get things implemented, for companies to implement some of the requirements. There's not much time. And with the conflict that we have and the war in Ukraine, the pressures that there will be placed on many corporates, on the social aspects, on inflation, on the economies resulting from that, will mean that we have to be very careful how we implement it, not to lose the momentum, but also making sure that it is done in a pragmatic manner as we want to look at long-term success. And that, I think, is essential. So the first aspect I wanted to quickly talk about is the taxonomy. And as I mentioned, this taxonomy is for the Europeans to provide a uniform approach. But there's an international platform for sustainable finance. This is developing a taxonomy that includes China, that includes UK, that includes Argentina. I think so. It has Canada, quite a number of countries. Until the war happened, even last year, Russia had its own taxonomy based on the EU. So it's a global trend. And I think that's important. Whatever the political views, whatever the conflicts, we're dealing with climatic and environmental issues has to be a global approach. Pollution does not know boundaries, does not know differences between ideology. And at the end of the day, we have to all work together to address this on a global scale. If we don't, we will fail. So that is an area where I think on environment, on some of these areas, we have to ensure it's a global. Bring in the Chinese. China is a very important aspect. And the Chinese taxonomy is there as well. India is also part of the international platform. So this is, I think, a very important area. It's not just Europe. It's a worldwide initiative. The US is behind, maybe because of the past regime that we had in the US. And the current more democratic approach will be applied to apply these issues. So when we look at the taxonomy, we, of course, the aim is to move systems into that direction of defining what's green. So the first delegated acts, we have the law, through delegated acts, is climate change mitigation has been approved and have been published. And these are already in place and used, you could say already by financial institutions as necessary. So the aim of the taxonomy is to have 6 environmental objectives. The first 2 have been already developed: climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, and they have been published. But the rest already in draft form. They are out there being under discussions, and hopefully an approval is implementing on the biodiversity, pollution prevention, circular economy, water and marine resources. And the aim is to ensure on the taxonomy eligibility that you comply with all 6 or do no significant harm, and one of them has a significant contribution. A significant contribution is where you're going to be going above and beyond, you could say, the normal operations. And that is either climate, either biodiversity, pollution, to sort of qualify as taxonomy aligned. There's a social taxonomy being developed, which will be slightly delayed, but the aim is to do no significant harm, to ensure their minimum safeguards. Because, as I said, if you deal with climate and you forget about biodiversity or forget about social, you could do more harm sometimes in the longer run. So we need to bring people in. This is why in Europe we have a just transition to ensure that there is that we don't let anyone left behind, that even if we close coal mines, change operations, people are safeguarded through various schemes and assistance from, you could say, from the state on development, but also for companies to take part in that and help in the report in the operations. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail because these slides will be hopefully made available, how the taxonomy fits within the sustainable finance framework. It's basically going to be very important in the CSRD, which I'll discuss, about reporting information of both asset managers and also companies and corporates to provide information. And that will have to be audited. So one thing that I want to just quickly touch on is there is, of course, use of capital markets, green bonds. You'll find out this is going to be a major area of financing in right now in Europe, but also internationally. We have the ICMA Green Bond and Sustainability Linked Principles as a key area of focus, but the EU is developing an EU Green Bond standard, which aims to use the taxonomy for the basis of the decision of what is green. So right now, ICMA does not. So the green bonds and sustainability loans don't refer to the taxonomy. They do refer to climate targets, KPIs, but the EU is working on its own approach. So it's important to understand that. But why is it relevant? Because you will have companies will use that. They will say key performance indicators, set targets, which have to be verified and audited. And to develop these instruments, you will have to sort of develop, for instance, in the steel sector, definition of what is green, what are realistic targets, and have secondary party opinions to ensure that there is consistency. But this information will have to be reported. And whenever you have reporting, there needs to be an internal system and an audit to assess, and of course, verified externally for to be used. So the next piece of regulation is to discuss is the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulations. These have already come in force, and these are aimed at the financial sector, asset managers, for instance, to define what are the principal adverse impacts, disclose information by financial institutions, and ensure that there is, if funds are labeled as green, they're defined in a consistent way what is green. And we have Article 9, which are the deep green funds, which are sustainable investments as their objectives. Article 8, which have environmental or ESG characteristics. And the rest are Article 6 to provide information. So there's a lot of focus on the E side. It's already come in place. There are regulatory technical standards on disclosure requirements. This information will, of course, be used for various reference points in financial products. So if you're selling a financial product and saying it is green, you need to be able to define how it is green to a common standard. And we've seen already quite a few investors, and we've seen BNY Mellon, for instance, fined, or others being fined for greenwashing or not providing adequate information, and that is starting to happen. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on asset managers, on the financial sector to provide, to define whether it's green, not to missell their products. And of course, we can discuss whether it's green enough, not green enough, whether gas should be green, whether nuclear should be green, and some other activity, or forestry for that matter, and that will all be disputed. But it enables a common yardstick to be used. And that's the important, I think, step going forward. It's a step, stop greenwashing, put transparency, and steer private capital into ESG approach. So just to give you what levels of information that you'll have, financial companies will have to provide. They'll have to provide information on assets on scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. They'll have to provide information on the overall performance and pollution and material impacts. And that means if the financial sector needs that information, they will go down to the corporates, to their clients, to obtain that information. So you have this percolating downwards side to the financial sector will require a lot of ESG information to enable them to fulfill their regulatory requirements of providing information, and for them to also assess what percentage of what operations are actually taxonomy aligned and disclose that. And that is all for all European companies. So, and operators and any investments in Europe. And Europe is a big source of financial activity. Therefore, many international companies will have to look at this, even if they're not based in Europe. So, again, I'm trying to go through more, so there'll be questions. The timeline, I leave that here to go in. It sometimes changes, and I think the timelines could be effective this year because as we see the consequences of the war in Ukraine, as the consequences of also the pandemic and the potential inflationary impacts on the cost of living and life standards, food availability, there will have to be a review of some of the approaches. But I think overall there is a good approach because it will help to, in fact, increase transparency, which at this day and age is probably, and this time and conjuncture, is important. The next one I wanted to discuss is, of course, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD. Probably the biggest change of legislation that has taken place. In my view, a cornerstone of actually developing for corporates, because it will set a mandatory requirement for reporting. And what this directive does is it replaces the 2014 directive on the non-financial reporting directive, which was voluntary. And if you see from the name, it's gone from non-financial to corporate sustainability. One of the key areas is to integrate the financial impacts, financial issues into the reporting approach. So again, that I think is important to assess whether it's integrating mandatory reporting and definitions. So I'll go through that a bit because I think this is key. So just in Poland, in Europe, that we had 11,000 companies on the NFRD, we have nearly 50,000 companies on the CSRD. The difference, I think, is from a few hundred in Poland on the NFRD to 3,600 on the CSRD. So it is a big impact. It will mean a lot more reporting. And of course, in that sense, you will have to provide information on targets related to sustainability matters, roles of the administrative management and supervisory boards, principles. That will have to keep the information disclosed. You will have to take systems in place to even collect that information. So it is not just a token approach because it will be audited. So unlike the CSRD reports or the past reports, which use GRI quite often as a benchmark, this will be mandatory, and therefore the board and management will have responsibility signing off on that. And when that happens, of course, the entire approach to the internal audit, to the external audit, to the data that is disclosed will increase. And as part of the CSRD, there are standards being developed, altogether 10, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. These have now been published in draft and are subject to consultation. I would recommend anyone that is looking at ESG issues to look into EFRAG pages to look at these standards. Just the biodiversity one is 116 pages to give you an indication of how much information there is requirement to understand. That will require next 2 years to provide information. And the Europeans have taken a very much approach of a double materiality, which is to look at not only how the company impacts the environment, but how the environment will impact the company. One of the requirements of those is, of course, climate. And the climate ESRS is, in essence, transposition of the TCFD, Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Reporting. The G7 has agreed among themselves that they will, all G7 countries will implement TCFD, and it has also been endorsed by G20. So it's becoming a world standard on reporting climatic information as part of financial reports. That is not only providing scope 1, 2, or 3, but it's also providing information on what the decarbonization strategy is. How will you meet net zero targets or the country's targets, because the aim is to follow what the NDCs are, and how that company fits into that. So course, if you're a coal operator and you have coal, you will be seeing that the future by 2030 is not very good. So what is your strategy to develop that, and how it will impact your assets and how will it impact your investment plans over these years? You have to start making these strategic information. So that actually is, I think, a very important area, because it will make the boards responsible, management responsible for providing information, not just like we had with CSR reports, which were the philanthropy type approach and some general declarations. These will have to be declarations made to the market, made to investors, made to shareholders and all stakeholders. One of the things in terms of the CSRD and the taxonomy, each company will need to provide information on the turnover derived from product services associated with economic activities that qualify as environmentally sustainable, and the proportion of the capital expenditure and operating expenditure related to assets or processes associated with economic activities that qualify as environmentally sustainable. And that, of course, meaning that if you have to provide that information, you'll have to collect the data, you'll have to audit it, because it will be verified as part of the financial statements. The large accountancies are already counting their, you could say, their beans, and saying that they will have to increase substantially their practices to deal with sustainability. There's also talk, and more among corporates, to implement chief sustainability officers, both at the board level and supervisory levels, just to manage that level of information, particularly on the carbon side, but also general sustainability. So it's a big shift in corporates moving that way. In terms of the taxonomy as well, it's right now we have this sort of green and not green, or sort of compliant and not compliant. There is work going on to look at transition, and that's going to be an important area. We as the EBRD look at transition finance, and it's a key area to look at use of proceeds versus economic activities. There's a big difference that takes place to ensure that there is that area of how do we move from one to the other? How do we move where there is a significant impact to do that significant contribution or do no significant harm? And we have to help companies do that and provide bridging financing. That is, I think, going to be an important area for development and discussion. So mandatory reporting is coming our way. So I'll give you the timelines. Again, these will be slides. It sort of gives out the outlines by when what is required. I do always recommend have a look at the EFRAG web pages, what is happening, particularly for European companies. That is essential. It's a year and a half to assess. One of the key areas that is also coming in is to assess value chains, i.e. supply chains, but a broader approach, both in terms of human rights. So, for instance, solar suppliers. Are the solar suppliers or the modules that you use for your solar panels coming from China? And 80% of actually polysilicate is from China. Are they coming from regions where there are allegations of human rights abuse? If that's the case, then you need to assess or provide and whether the company wants to deal with that. In the same way, with transparency, we will have some companies which are sanctioned and some operations that are sanctioned. Are your suppliers coming from that? It's a business risk because, of course, if there are sanctions put in place or if there is a change of even tariffs associated with that, that could affect your business operations long term if they're coming from jurisdictions which are subject to that or companies that have been found to be in violation. And if your market is in Europe and the US, for instance, that will hit you harder. So those are very important areas to look at on the value chains. And also biodiversity. Is your biodiversity, do you have an impact on the biodiversity in your supply chains? Where does your cobalt come from? Where there's some rare earth metals, where, of course, palm oil is known, some other areas are known. But if we want to stop deforestation, if we want to stop some of the climatic impacts, we need to look at that. We need corporates to review that and internally audit them. So, overview of standards in the future. I have put in the alphabet soup of the various standards that are happening, the TCFDs, GRIs, CDSBs, CDPs, taxonomy, everything is going in. I have, I think, 17 listed here just in this, and there are more because I'm sure I've missed a number of those. So one of the successes of COP26, in my opinion, has been the establishment under the auspices of the IFRS Foundation. So it's under the accounting umbrella of the International Sustainable Standards Board, which will have 3 locations. These are being set up, one in Asia, one in, I think, Holland, and one in the US. So there will be 3, so it becomes very international. And the ISSB is to develop the international reporting standards that will be audited as well on the international level. That coincides with EFRAG, which is European. So there will be these 2 areas. The Europeans will be a bit more, but there's close cooperations, and agreements have been signed between ISSB, EFRAG, and actually GRI to work together to develop these standards so that there's a common benchmark, a common approach. There are differences, but these will be probably Europeans going a bit further. Minimum standards will be the same. The international will be single materiality, the Europeans is double materiality. But there's already been publishing and subject to ongoing consultations right now, both the EFRAG documents and the first 2 prototypes from the International Sustainable Standards Board. So this is, again, a very fast-moving area. These will be audited, and they will be internationally audited. And if we look at even the US has recently said that climate reporting will be under the SEC mandatory. So the sustainability information is going to become a global more and more requirement. And just to follow that takes some time. So I would recommend looking at that. Now, we as the EBRD have been trying to do our task and our approach. So we launched with, in May 2021, we worked, it took a year and a half actually, to work with the Warsaw Stock Exchange to develop guidelines. These are now published, they're in Polish and in English. And we worked with an external panel, including European Commission. So when it was published in May, before the CSRD was only draft at this stage, we already looked at future-proofing it. So I think it's still valid today. But by next year, probably will need to be updated. And in this case, we'll also publish one in Bucharest, but we're working right now in the Prague Stock Exchange to develop a new guideline by September, October, which hopefully will take into account some of the changes that are taking place at the EU and international level. So we're trying to keep that upfront. But these guidelines are useful for companies to develop what level of data, what information to be provided, and how to report on that. And of course, data management becomes the biggest problem going through. So what it means and where we are. First of all, SFDI is already here. CSRD will be mandatory, coming in place from next year, and reporting from 24, and depending on the scale, 25. Taxonomy is being developed. Much of it is in place. These will be delegated acts, which will define what is green. Is it greenwashing, as Professor Roque said? No, but there will be instances that there will be disputed. But it will set a benchmark. And if you don't have a mandatory benchmark of saying, like, no smoking in a restaurant, people will smoke. So therefore, this issue is so important to develop so that we as professionals, the auditors and companies, and the general public will have a benchmark of what is acceptable, what is not, and the definition of that, and need to monitor. Now, compliance today, but we need to future-proof for future compliance and future operations. And that's a big role of many of the auditors, of supervisory boards. We have to look at not what is today, and quite often this was the difference. A financial report was always looking backwards what happened in the past year and ongoing risks. You didn't look forward. So it was a bit like driving forward, but looking at the mirror backwards and trying to go forward in that by looking at what happened in the past. So what we need to do is to look at what is the future, what's going to be next 5, 10 years, in terms of some of the requirements, and then some of these will be mandatory, but there will also be some areas that will be voluntary. What is the company's position to deal with coal? What's the position to deal with supply chains? How will you attain your targets? And what business implications it can have? So this is, I think, an EU focus, but it's not only EU, because EU accession countries will have to require it. We are looking at international mechanisms as well, and the Europeans, particularly on, for instance, carbon adjustment mechanism, just to ensure that there is no leakage. That will impact international businesses operating internationally to provide carbon information. And the Europeans are putting in a corporate sustainability due diligence directive, which used to be referred to as the Environment and Human Rights Due Diligence Directive, which will focus on supply chains, focus on procurement, focus on information. It will help to internalize some of the data collections for the reporting requirements. This directive is only being discussed right now. It'll probably take another 2-3 years before it is fully implemented, if not even longer. But it's looking at the direction of travel, that the internal due diligence, internal assessments of due diligence and the internal audit will become extremely important under these areas. How do you audit your suppliers? How do you audit and verify your data that is being provided? Much of it from ESG professionals or throughout, but someone has to systematically review that this is accurate, because there's liability issues for the company. So, of course, the risks are key, and greenwashing is a risk. I like Professor's slide on is it greenwashing? Yes, it is the key concept and the key issue. There is so much money to be made. If I look at subscriptions for green bonds, sustainability green bonds, if you say something is green, you have more money flowing in that direction than there are projects and over subscriptions or over investment. So this issue of defining is going to be essential, so that we don't lose the trust of the public and the trust of the stakeholders. And this is, again, auditors are essential in this role to ensure that we can assess and keep the trust of the public that this is done appropriately. And my last slide, because I think I'm probably time-wise running up to it, is some issues to discuss, to consider. How will reporting disclosure influence the market? How will integrated reports look like and change? What's the role of the internal auditor versus external? And that right now in the discussions of the EFRAG ESRSs is being discussed. What is mandatory, what shall, what will, what may be reported? What is self-reported and therefore internally assessed, and what is externally verified? Extremely important areas to ensure that it's clear to all players what is done internally, what is done externally verification, because it also costs money. Of course, what will this apply versus international frameworks? How will the international community deal with this, and how to ensure there's a consistency of approach, because we still live in a global economy. I hope we continue to live in a global economy. And that means that there needs to be a trust of information, flow of information as well. Yeah. I think that was the slide. And just, I think that, I lost the slides for some reason. Just the last question to consider is, the green bonds, which I discussed, and key area that will have to be is what's the main driver for an organization, and how will data be collected? So with that, happy to answer questions or discussions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for this rich presentation. A lot of information, and you said what I'm trying to underline all the time, that it takes some time to follow this all information, this new regulation, and we already should start. And also thank you very much for underlying the role of internal auditors, because it's different when internal auditors speak about our role than when SSG expert advisors speak about this role. So the impact of this is the impact of your words for sure is much bigger than the impact of the words of internal auditors. So thank you for this. And so if we start with, so we know a bit about leadership now. We were after a great presentation from Professor Rock. We know a lot about EU regulation, but now I would like to speak a bit more about the life of internal auditor and about the real life, not only in Europe. So Muner, so I have a few questions to you, and But maybe we'll start from really simple issue, and Professor Rock say something about the temperature in Pakistan, if I would remember, on his presentation. So maybe we can start about the weather in Oman and the impact of climate change for your country.
Yeah, thank you, Olga, for inviting me to be here with my colleagues. I think this topic really requires collaborative efforts. We have regulators who are actually coming with the regulations and telling us what needs to be done, and also all involved parties. Our role in internal audit really to advocate for those changes and really make sure, along with the regulators, make things happen. And we will speak about the role of internal audit as we go along. I think as we speak now, I can feel the temperature. It's almost 40 degrees now here in Oman, so which is normal actually. It's not a surprise, but it's getting hotter and hotter, and we have seen the changes. One thing we need to realize where Oman is. Oman is actually in the South Arabian Peninsula, where the landscape actually is all about mountains and deserts. Usually, in the past, what we used to have is 1 to 2 storms or cyclone comes every 10 for 15 years. Nowadays, we are seeing this coming every 1 to 2 years. And it is really having a big impact on Oman and on the financial aspects and in the infrastructures here in Oman. So this is something that the change is coming to us. Also, Oman is heavily relying on oil. So, but also that has been now significantly changing, where the economy is being diversified, and we are trying to move from oil and gas. But Oman is one of the, if not maybe 75% of its economy relying on oil production as well. That is actually where we are now in Oman, and that's how the weather is actually also being impacted by all of what's happening here in Oman. In terms of population, we have almost 5.1 million only. However, that 5.1 million mainly concentrated in the rural area and beside the seasides, and that is also because of the climate changes. We getting the cyclones from the sea, and those are the most affected areas in Oman.
Okay, so what we read in IPCC reports already, you already feel on your in your everyday life. So it's really important, and I think it's also build can give some imagination about that, what can happen in 2 years, and probably we don't have so many years as we think to stop the climate change catastrophe. But so we already heard a lot about EU regulation, and do you have also in Oman some regulation in this area connected with climate change or responsible business?
Yes. So still we are not, in Oman here, we don't have any requirement for ESG disclosures or any standards yet. However, in the GCC, we have the UAE and King Saudi Arabia is already ahead of us, and also Bahrain has already introduced this ESG disclosure requirement. But it's very, I think it's coming here in Oman, and I can see in my discussions with the regulators and the key stakeholders here in Oman, it's going to come. However, within the organizations here in Oman, we have seen many initiatives from the organization themselves. Regardless what the regulation says, we have values within our organization. For example, if you have a value of being a good citizenship, that also puts some pressure and some commitments from the organizations, where they really need to demonstrate how much they are doing for the societies, and that can be unlimited parameters. It could be climate, it could be governance, it could be social things. All of those are a part of the ESG initiatives. But we are getting there. As of now, we still don't have anything in Oman in terms of ESG in particular.
Okay, so from one side we can have a pressure from the regulators, but from other side we can have a pressure from citizens, and it's also really important. And but also the responsibility of the boards I think it's really crucial, and if we can speak a bit about companies, because one thing is, the leadership, big picture, regulation, but at the end of this road, the company must implement this. And so what do you think, as a head of audit and the person with a great experience in business, how to convince the boards to tackle the climate change issue? Why they should matter about this?
Yeah. So before we go to the board, just one thing also I want to emphasize here, what the country is doing here in Oman at the international level and at the national level. At the international level, Oman is already part of this ratification Paris Agreement that was signed in April 2019. And our mandate is to reduce the greenhouse gas emission by 2% by 2030. So this is also as a commitment from the country here in Oman. And to do that, there are many initiatives being taken here in Oman. Few of them are better climate, green future initiatives. We have Oman Eco House design competitions that make people aware about what is required. We have recycling, diversions. We have created here companies that really take care of the environmental aspects. And we have also improved forecasting, and that improved forecasting is going to have an alarming whenever there is a change in the climate, giving reports to the government, to the regulators, and to make sure that we are really within the same ecosystem where everybody is actually in charge of making that commitment to protect the planet. Also been doing at the renewable energy. Oman is now really going to this green carbohydrate, and also we are now having a commitment where we secure more than 2,600 milliwatt by 2025. So there are many initiatives the government is taking toward that directions, and in line and with other international bodies around the globe, including the United Nations and so forth. Now, when we speak about the board of directors, why the board actually should be alerted about this? There is a study from McKinsey actually. What does it say? That ESG should be it should be unavoidable and should be part of how we do business. So also we understand that the whole environment, the whole business, the whole economy is interlinked with each other. We cannot isolate ourselves here in Oman from what is happening in Europe or what happens in Africa or Asia. So the board, in order for the board to be functioning well and to make sure their business is sustainable and they will continue to make profit, they really need to be alerted to what is happening around us. And therefore, they need to start really lead to more sustainable business and better value creations. Now, for the board, for us to make sure that we are really creating a value, we need to think about the top line growth. We need to think about the cost reductions. We need to know about the regulations and whatever happening. Now, my colleague, Mr. Robert, said, there are 17 regulations available now. So out of 17, what is applicable to us? Where do we operate? This is very important. Otherwise, we have some regulatory requirement and we might be penalized. All of this, it becomes very important for the board to take into consideration whenever they are actually thinking about ESG. The board also should understand the impact, because without understanding the impact and the economic shifts that's happening because of ESG, that is going to jeopardize our existence and our operations, and also maximizing shareholders' value. Because that's what the board is always trying to do, is to try to maximize shareholders' value through different initiatives by mainly making profit. And that profit also should be really responsible way of making a profit. Now, Professor Rock already highlighted the main drivers for the changes. And unless the board understands those main drivers of the changes, they will not be able really to sustain their business. They are very critical for them, the economic part, the market part, the social part, then all of those things need to be taken into consideration. So then the finance also is very critical, because now without having the finance pressure, they will not be able to fund their operations. Liquidity is an issue nowadays. We have already seen the inflation, what is happening around us. Those are all very critical. And I think for us as auditors, we just need to refer to that slide and see how important is our role to make sure our board is aware about what needs to be done, and make sure they are prepared to take actions and taking them into consideration in their strategy, in their business model.
Okay, so
now,
you're
yes.
Continue.
Okay. So with economic shifts, we see that there is raising in insurance cost. We see that there is a decreasing property values. We see also raising in healthcare cost. We see also insurance. Insurance is really impacted by this, because whatever happens aftermath is being managed by the insurance. The energy also is being impacted. So if we operate within those market, within those sectors, we really need to understand what's happening there. One thing also I need to highlight here that it's been already highlighted by the World Economic Forum, that when it comes to the highest likelihood risk in the next 10 years, extreme weather is there. So board must help their organization adapt the requirement of those national and international law to make sure that they are sustainable and they are really aware about those risks. Now, a few things that the board must understand when it comes to the risk associated to ESG is actually the regulation and compliance. In Europe, there are many regulations currently coming into effect. The board must understand those regulations. The compliance within our businesses also understand those regulations and see to what extent they are relevant to our industry. And specifically when we speak about the banking and insurance, those are highly regulated. And when we speak about they are highly regulated, so and our professor, Mr. Roque, is highlighting that the financial pressure is one of the most and far critical aspects. So we expect the central banks to come up with the regulations that will mandate the banking and the insurance to do certain things to protect the climate, and we need to be aware about this.
Okay, so
also, yes.
Okay, so we live in really complicated times, a lot of regulation and a lot of challenges, and you say a lot about the situation of your country, the rule of the board, what they must consider, how to make business better, and but I would like to back to the topic that you already also mentioned, the role of internal auditor, because we already know that we can help build the trust from the presentation of Professor Roque, and after Robert also underline our crucial role in whole process of sustainable reporting, and our role to confirm, to give assurance about the reliability of the data. So
can you repeat that? So Olga, I think I got disrupted.
No. Can you tell more a bit the role of internal audit from your perspective?
Okay. So the role of internal audit is basically to do and make sure what our what Prof. Roque and our colleague Robert said is being implemented. Just that to make it short. However, I think the trick is how we are going to do it. The good thing is that about internal audit, our profession is really very dynamic. So we have the IIA coming up with many reports, white papers telling us what is going to be the role of internal audit. That's a very good reference for all of us, really to go back and relate ourselves what we do about. This is very important. Also, in internal audit, we look at ourselves as an agent of change. And this is an opportunity for us really to demonstrate to the community, to our shareholders, to our businesses, to the regulators, and to the clients, to the citizenship, that we are really advocating for a change. This is very important. A survey actually was done on the CAE, and actually, surprisingly, 50% of the CAEs do not have ESG audit as part of their audit plan. However, the good thing is that they are planning to have it within the next 10 years. So it's not like they are not doing and not. They are planning to do it, and I hope their plan really becomes true. So what internal audit should do when it comes to ESG? One thing we do is that we need to provide and give assurance to the board of directors that we are really in compliance and we have a good risk management, compliance activities which are adequate to also demonstrate that we are really into the right direction toward our commitment. When I say about commitment, we need to understand also what are we committed at now out of the 17 standards that, for example, available in Europe. To which one this is applicable to us, to my industry? Do I have any obligations toward those ones? So this is very fundamental that we really need to look at. Once we do that and we understand our businesses and to what extent our business is impacted by, depends on the industry that we are actually operating, what are the relevant laws, what are the relevant regulations, and then by understanding that we need to extract what we are supposed to commit. And then we look at the business from inside as well, by validating the effectiveness of the related controls. And when I say validating, when it comes to the reporting requirement, so are we really reporting on accurate information? Everybody here is speaking about greenwashing. And now it's not about greenwashing only, it's also about greenwashing. Greenwashing is that in 10 years, I want to be at this position. Now that commitment has its reputational risk. And unless we in internal audit make sure that whatever we are trying to wish is aligned with the strategy, is aligned with our actions, is aligned with our budgets, aligned with financial situations, this is very important for us to really to look at. One thing also in internal audit that we can do is that we review the corporate governance structures. Do we have adequate policies, procedures, the authority within the organization that really give us the mandate to really meet our ESG commitment? One thing also we could look at is the culture. And when I speak the culture, I speak the mindset. And before we reflect that on our businesses, the most important that we in internal audit, we need to really have the same mindset. In internal audit, before we start auditing, we really need to believe in the climate change. We need to really believe in ESG. And if we not, it's always important for us to educate ourselves that what does it mean and what is going to be the impact, how this is going to contribute to the world itself. So once ourselves believe in that, we really need to assess our cultures. Yes, maybe we have a commitment, but we don't see that practices within the organizations. We don't see that practices within our board or within our senior management. Our investment philosophy, our investment strategy, wherever we finance, is not really in line with what we really want to achieve. So something that we really need to be careful about the culture. Now, with the change in regulations, there is also always a cost. And that increased cost will have a significant impact on our businesses. We in internal audit need to make sure that whatever cost, we speak about financial costs, so maybe we can get a finance, but at a premium because we are not complying with certain regulations. Or maybe there is a covenant in one of the contract with the regulations that makes us violating that contract or that covenant if we don't comply with it. But something that we always need to help the management with and make sure they are really complying with. Now, we shouldn't be also trying to look at protecting the value. We should always create value for the business, and that where we are trying to be an agent of change and being trusted advisor. We also need to look at the opportunities that the ESG brings. There are lots of opportunities. Honestly speaking, now we see many VCs investments going to green. We have green bonds, we have green investments. So this also brings many opportunities for us, where we start recommending to the business really investing in VCs that are green VCs. So those are the opportunities we need to bring on the table, and to make sure that our companies is actually going to the right track and exploring those opportunities, specifically where to invest, what to invest, and we give a foresight and insight to the business rather than only looking at the hindsights.
Okay. Thank you for this. I like this term, greenwashing. I think I will use it for sure in the future. And thank you also for this, that you underline that not only assurance we can deliver, but we can also show the opportunities which give us the ESG. So this is also important, and we should remember about this in our everyday work. But so now, if one of our participants, one of auditor, will come to you, Munir, so I would you encourage me to make this ESG audit. So how can I start? Yeah, what would you say to this person?
Yeah, the first thing we need to understand the context. We need to understand our business environment. So now, assuming that everybody understands ESG, we need to understand the operating model. We need to understand the business environment, the industry, and the impact of our industry into ESG, and what are the risks associated with this. This is very fundamental. Unless we understand our business, we will not be able to do anything. We will not be able to deliver any value. So first, understand your business, understand the operating environment, understand the strategy, understand our commitments. What regulation is applicable to us? Once we know what regulation is applicable to us, what is our commitment? Do we have an internal commitment for reporting, disclosures? This is fundamental. Once you start and identify those ones, you need to look at also at the business. What values do we have? We need to read the contracts. We need to have we need to go through the financial agreement. We need to interview key people. My colleague also highlighted the third-party risk. It's not necessarily it's with me. It's maybe I have a contract with a third party. They also have responsibility to do something when it comes to ESG. So also that I need to advocate for that change, and I need to make sure those third parties that I'm engaging with are also in alignment with our vision of how we are going to contribute. One thing also, we need to look at the risk register within the business. So if we have a risk department, we need to make sure that we are actually in close collaboration with our risk department, and we review our risk register and make sure that it is being reflected in the business and the business is really taken into consideration. We need to look at our mission, what the organization is doing. And after all of this, once you understand, I think there is nothing remaining for us to do. Just basically is an internal audit process that everybody is aware of. But those are a prerequisite for us to really be able to be able to audit the ESG. One last thing maybe I need to highlight is that what KPIs we have for the business to honor our commitment, how we are going to measure them, are we measuring them, are we monitoring them, do we have smart plans where they really meet the targets, and are we reporting, are we using accurate data, are the integrity of the data, how are they sanitized? All of these corporate governance structures with the reporting itself should be taken into consideration.
Okay, great. So we must understand the context. We must learn and understand the new regulation, and after use the tools that we already know very well, and carry out the audits in our organization. So I know that it's a really short summary of this, but it's really important. And what is also what I like in your conversation, in your speech, is that you also underline not only risk in our organization but also third-party risk. That it was also mentioned by Robert that we must understand the risk, not only our risk but also in a whole supply chain, a whole value chain, and this double materiality is also, I think, really important. It's not only how we impacted the environment, but how the environment, but also other things impacted our organization. So I think this is few crucial thing. Honestly, it's 11:40, so I think that we will be a few minutes. Please stay with us a few minutes longer. We are a bit out of time, but we still have a question from you. I see on the chat. So I would like now ask our great expert to take a look of this question, and during this time I will tell you about few my initiatives and initiatives of IAA Poland and ECIIA. I would like to invite you for the conferences, so please stay with us a few minutes more, and gentlemen, if you could take a look for the question, and we will back to the question in a minute. So I would like to tell you, first I would like to tell you about earning platform, which I run. I started last year, and more than 100 people already took part in this training, Ethics for Auditor. And thanks to your feedback this year, I changed the platform. I changed some technical issue that you a bit complain. So I hope that now it all will be okay, and it was not so bad in the past, but I try to make everything what you underline better. So you can find there 6 movies and 30 real cases which I took from my professional life, but also from the life of many of chief audit executive and other auditors. So I think that it will be really nice in Polish, but also I will run this in English. So I think it could be really interesting. You know that ethics is really important for me. That's why it's the only training, but based on basis value, we can say. In June, I will have 3 trainings for you. One is writing high impact reports. And this training I ran last year also in English and in Ukrainian for the biggest bank in Ukraine. So I can also run this in English, but I invite especially my Polish colleagues to Polish version of this training in June. SSG for auditors. Today you already know that there is a lot of things to follow and a lot of things to learn. So I think that it's high time to start if you haven't started yet. And the last one is about whistleblowing and dedicate to new regulation on EU level and in Poland. So this is what I have for you. These 4 trainings. I hope that you will enjoy and join me in June. But I have also 2 other things for you from IAA. The first is 20th anniversary of IAA Poland, and next week we have a national conference in Poland. So if someone still haven't joined us, so still you have a chance. I will be a speaker on this conference, and I will speak about SSG. I don't know if you are surprised. And the second one is organized by ECIA, so our European Confederation of Internal Auditors. This year, this conference is organized by IAA Belgium, so it's in Brussels. The topic is internal audit in a world of transition. 6-7 of October, this conference is in presence. I will have also a chance to be a speaker on this conference, and I will speak about risk management in SSG areas. So 2 really nice conferences. If you have time, please join us. If you want more deep knowledge about SSG, I invite you for my trainings. Okay, so this is everything what I had from you. So you know that I'm really short about advertisement all the time, but because the other things are the real meaning of these meetings is to share with you knowledge. So we have still a few questions, so I will try to put this question on the screen now. And the first okay, maybe this way. Do you see the questions?
I think
Only I don't see the question.
if I can say,
okay.
yes, if I can say, because
okay, so this is maybe gentlemen, maybe you choose some question, because I see that we have a lot.
So probably we have some technical issues.
I have some technical problem. I see. In computers, my professor is actually. So yeah, I feel I had a wrong professor. Professor, could you start from answering the question?
Yes, I can say just few words. I can see that there are some technical problems here on the screen, but it's. I hope that you can see me. And just one question, one point here, because there was a lot of discussions in the beginning on chat concerning small changes in our life. Yeah, and I think that it's what I can recommend is always just pretty short. Don't waste. Don't waste resources. Financial resources, human resources, natural resources, and just be conscious about that. And it's the second was about I've seen that money dedicating to green projects in the EU have been not completely used. And I think it's significant because Munir was talking about opportunity, and a lot of companies can't see this opportunity yet. The money flow is already here, ready for green projects, and companies are not ready for the intake of that stream. So I think that it's really a point when a lot of companies can see that we need those changes as quickly as possible, and also from the perspective of the climate catastrophe. So we need that change at all levels. Personal level is important, but also organizational level, and then public level or global level. All levels are important, and we have to do what we can, at every level where we are operating. So I think that it's, and especially at the organizational level, it's not only that we need tone from the top. I think that the tone from the bottom up is necessary, and the tone from anywhere in between. And especially those middle management can make a huge change. So it's from my experience working with different companies that even if we have, great leaders, we need operational level ready for this change. Thank you.
Okay, Robert, would you like to add something, answer some of those questions? What? You have turned off the microphone, so.
Am I on?
Okay, now. Sir?
Am I on? Okay.
Yeah.
So okay, if you can repeat the question, because I had problems with hearing.
I asked if if you choose some of question from our chat, and if you would like to add something, what Professor said, or what was comment on the chat.
I think I'm just looking. It's difficult to get all the questions, but I think what my just quick and main take is the role of internal assurance is going to become an essential role. And with all the changes that happen in legislation, it's a question of how to prepare everybody to be ready. And I think that's the critical issue is how do we do training? How do we internalize? ESG will have specialists doing specific areas, but a key element will be an audit process to ensure that you've got the data. And that doesn't require, I don't want to say rocket science, it doesn't require you to be an expert in ESG, but you will need to understand the systems and know when to bring in the experts when needed. And I think a critical area with a lot of what is happening, that everybody can say there's sustainability in ESG, like health and safety, but when you need the critical aspects, you'll need to bring in the experts. And knowing when to bring in the experts is going to be, in my view, the critical area for people to understand. And to stop the greenwashing, which it's a great one. The greenwashing is, I think, this. I've heard this a few times mentioned. It's a great. It's this aspirational, and particularly a lot of boards and a lot of managers are on a 4-year contract or appointed for a short term, and therefore they're wishing for the next 8 years can be a pie in the sky. And I used to remember doing due diligence in Poland in the early 90s and coming in and the use of the word możliwe translated into possible, and how two investors would come out from those two sides. The Polish side would say, yeah, jest możliwe, bez problemu, which would mean not a hell of a chance, I can build it on the moon, whilst the Western side would come possible, 95% done deal. And how these perspectives were different. And this greenwashing is a bit that way, I think. It's that I will promise you the earth by 2030, but I know I will be leaving the company by 2026. So I'll get a bonus for giving you that vision. But what will happen is, I'll eat the bonus, I'll disappear. How do you then link in the future remediation of management boards with those goals and future goals? How do you withhold something and the share options, other things? How do you ensure that there isn't that greenwashing and that you just wish and then go away but take the money and leave the company and society without actually the solutions? That's going to be a challenge. So I think there will need to be this longer term with climate. If you make an aspirational view, okay, what does it mean? How do you get even compensated for that longer term? Is going to be, I think, a challenge, difficult in a market economy to do, but something we need to think about in a broader picture in your internal auditor.
Okay, great. Thank you for this, also for this aspect of greenwashing. And Munar, would you like to add something at the end to sum up our meeting today?
Thank you. I think, as I said, whatever Professor Rourke and my colleague Robert said, I think that's something that for us as an audit community, we need to take into consideration and something that we really need to implement. The onus is on us to what extent we can contribute this. This is why we really need to believe in this ESG. So then we have a vital role in trying to implement. One day, I just want to share one story from my side. I remember working in a company where it was related to an environment. So basically, it was a chemical plant. And they went all the way doing all the due diligence, and they invested the money, they appointed the project manager, and they almost spent almost $1 million, $2 million dollar. And then the community refused. This is going to impact our environment. We don't want you to do this. But see, they have done that too late after they have spent the money. for us, an internal audit to make sure that whatever project is going to be done, it goes through a stakeholder assessment. And that stakeholder assessment takes into consideration who are the stakeholders going to be impacted. In that context, it was the society, and the society was able to raise their voices. No, we are not going to accept this project to be here in this area. And what eventually happened, the government stood up with the society, with the people, and they stopped that project. For a business, that is a reputational risk. For a business, they lost money and wasted money. This is where internal audit comes into embedding themselves within that process.
Okay. So thank you very much. We are a bit out of time. So one more time, I would like to thank to our great guest speakers for your knowledge, for your commitment, for some inspiration. It was really amazing, I think, for everyone who joined us today. And I see that it was more than 300 people. So a big thank you to every single person who joined us today and would like to hear what we would like to share with you. It was a great pleasure. I would like to say thank you to all our partners, IE Poland, IE Oman, ACCA, PIBR, Climate Leadership Program, and Grid Warsaw, and every single person who shared information about this webinar in the community. We are strong together, so see you on the next webinar, and thank you one more time for your attention.